ChatGPT and Gen AI tools have hit the mainstream. The chatter was everywhere by almost everyone. We feel the discussion has been more philosophical than practical. We know enterprise technologists are using real AI to create efficiencies that result in real business outcomes. So, we created a show to talk to real practitioners about real-world active projects that are leveraging this exciting new technical advantage. Welcome to LiveAI.
We are back for more LiveAI, the show that brings real-life enterprise AI use cases to the people. Our guest today is Stuart Long, CEO of InfoBionic.AI, a virtual cardiac telemetry company. Welcome to the show, Stuart.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Now, InfoBionic has developed an AI-based wearable cardiac monitoring for arrhythmia. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of how your team built out the solution, just tell us a little bit more about the mission of InfoBionic.
Sure. Well, it started with multiple co-founders, but one of which was a electrophysiologist, and he essentially is the grandfather of EP up in New England. He literally wrote the book. He opened the first electrophysiology lab in New England. And what electrophysiology is the type of cardiologist that really specializes on the electrical side of your heart. So your heart has, it's like your house. It has electricity and has plumbing. So the electricity side is what helps the heart do its plumbing, squeeze the blood. And so he thought there had to be a better way than what was done conventionally. And that was going back to about 2012 or so. And in the world of monitoring back then, lots of different devices, lots of different IT systems, fax machines, all sorts of stuff. So he wanted to try to consolidate into a single system. And so that was the genesis, was to consolidate it, make it easier for doctors. But at the same time, he wanted to create a system that was able to communicate and stream data versus getting snippets of data, which for a clinician, it limits your capability. And so he was trying to improve efficiency for the physicians and better care for the patients. And so that's how we got the idea in terms of how we wanted to, the system to be designed from a clinical perspective. And then some of the business side of the folks who helped found the company came up with the business model that we originally founded and have helped shape the industry now. Here we are, almost 12, 13, 14 years later.
Wow. Now, let's discuss the wearable device itself and what it was designed to do.
Sure. So the device itself, typically there's four kinds of tests in our industry. And one of the tests goes back to the 60s. Dr. Holter was his name. So it's called a Holter test. It's usually a 2-day test. And you probably know somebody in your life, most everybody does, that's probably had a Holter test, whether it's a parent, grandparent, or even children, for example. But the original pictures of these are people wearing this thing on their back like a backpack, just huge device. And up till probably about 10 or 15 years ago, they were still very, very large devices that you would see people saran wrapping on or taping to your body so it wouldn't fall off. And that was just one kind of test. Then there were other tests that said, okay, I need to wear the monitor longer. And then there was two different kinds of long-term tests. So there were different kinds of tests. And finally, they built one that could start to communicate. So you'd hold it up to your phone and it would get the fax tone and it would send some signals. So where we landed in terms of the device in its age and day, and it's, in the world of kind of today's technology, it doesn't sound innovative, but at the time it was, we allowed a single device to do all of the tests. And we allowed it to connect to the body and then start streaming it to the cloud via a SIM card or like a cell phone. So it was really first of kind at its time. And at the same time, we were using some, really early machine learning, the beginnings of the AI as we know it today, to train the signal processing that we do. And so that's how we got to where we are. But we were the first one to come with a all-in-one device that streams data so that physicians are getting the data in almost real time. We call it near real time.
And this device then is something that someone can use at home then. So they're not having to be in a care facility of some type in order for you to gather this information.
That's exactly right. So it could be great examples are, any patient feels like they're dizzy, or they're having palpitations, or their heart's fluttering, or chest pain, or something like that. They'll typically call their doctor, who may refer them to a cardiologist, and the cardiologist would see them and do an evaluation and say, okay, I think we need to put a monitor on you because your symptoms are symptomatic or not symptomatic. And symptomatic means you feel it, but they're intermittent, what we call paroxysmal. So they're not all the time. It could be over the course of a week, once or twice. It could be over the course of a month, maybe only one time. So we wanted to be able to put the devices on for a longer period of time, not limit the amount of time that you would monitor. And we didn't want to limit the amount of information because sometimes these things occur. And if you weren't paying attention, then you didn't hit a button to send it to the
Sure.
provider, and you wouldn't send it. And then you'd have to mail it in. And 30 days later, somebody might scan that and see, oh, you had a problem on the second day you wore the device, but I had to wear it for 30 days. And I just got the device back in a week later. So it could be, almost 2 months sometimes before doctors get their results in kind of in the old school way. Whereas with us, when the event occurs, you don't have to push a button. The system picks it up through the AI, notifies the doctor almost immediately, and they can take action if they want.
Oh, that's amazing. And I think in the old ways of testing like that, if you can't catch something in the moment, to your points, this just extends the amount of time and frustration of trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. It's like, I swear I have this problem, but then every time we try to diagnose it or put a diagnostic on it, we just aren't having the problem at the time. And I think being able to do that from your home, obviously, is a really big deal, which we've seen a huge transformation in wearables and stuff like that over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
With, especially with the inventions of the smartphones and now the watches and all that kind of thing. How does what you do, and then we'll dig into kind of the AI here in a second, the difference between, say, just like an Apple Watch versus a device of the caliber that you're making?
Sure. So if you think of, kind of monitoring in and of itself, really in three big buckets. So there's when you think about screening, which is kind of a consumer grade device, and the consumer grade really kind of breaks into medical grade versus, say, like athletic wear. So I was a long time, endurance, marathoner, triathlete, and I had my strap that went around my chest, but I never monitored it for ECG. I was just tracking my heart rate. When you get into the medical grade, you get into like the Apple Watch, where they've gone out, they got an FDA approval. It doesn't diagnose, but it's qualified by the FDA to be of good enough quality to suggest something. They fall prey to false positives, which means, oh, I think you might have a problem, and a large majority of the time it can be a false positive. And so you've sent, the watch gives you an indication, says you might have AFib, consult your doctor. So you'll call your doctor. And then the second bucket, after the doctor sees you, he would say, okay, yeah, there might be something there. Let's try to diagnose it. So the second bucket is diagnosis, and that's where we sit. So we're a next level up in terms of FDA classification and quality over the kind of the medical consumer screening device. Screening devices are great. And we've got, mammogram screening, got colonoscopy screening. So cardiac screening it's a good thing. The challenge is high false positive rates on a lot of the devices because of the technology that you wear on your wrist is not as good as let's put electrodes on. And because an ECG is really just a difference in voltage. So it measures the difference in voltage in two different spaces on your body. So when you're in the hospital, they'll put something on your ankle all the way up on your shoulder, and they're going to measure that at all sorts of different vectors. Whereas on your watch, you really don't have multiple points. You don't get a good,
right, it's all in the same spot.
So that's the difference. Yeah. So then that last bucket is therapy, and that has not, you go inside the body at that point.
So how are you using AI to, you mentioned false positives. So how are you using AI to reduce false positives?
Yeah, it's actually was our first step forward in AI, I think. So I think we'll, kind of past the first initial. So, AI is, I think most people might understand it, is really, Chat GPT and things of that you hear that's very commonplace in the news. We started dabbling with this, probably in the early 2000s, with trying to understand how to improve signal processing quality so that it wasn't having false positives, sifting through the noise. So one of the challenges you have when you leave a hospital is you're no longer stationary. You're not laying in a bed. You're not being monitored with somebody sitting out at a desk. And when that event occurs, they just pick up the phone and call somebody, or they walk in the room. So when you're at home, you're moving constantly. And so there's all sorts of artifact or noise. So where the early AI and machine learning came on was to train the ECG of what a normal good signal looks like with high quality signal processing. And then we trained that, of course, and through the training process, you get better at sifting through the noise, literally, for determining what's an actual arrhythmia inside of the noise, and then holding true to that. And one of the nice things about sending the data or streaming it is, even though you have noise, you're on and you're still streaming, you can get through the noise. The patient might settle, they may stop moving, and then you can get into a regular rhythm, and you can see that. So you can scroll forward and backwards. So we eventually got around to saying, okay, we know that we've got all these particular arrhythmias. Now let's try some machine learning on the actual arrhythmias, not just trying the signal processing at it's at the most basic level. So we went after AFib, which is the most common arrhythmia that is on the planet, in fact, and it's one of the highest costs to treat patients if you don't catch it early enough. So that's why you see a lot of programs around atrial fibrillation, a lot of press around atrial fibrillation, because it just has a high cost, and if you don't get it in time, it can lead to stroke, which is it has a high comorbidity rate as well. So we found, after training the algorithm with first attempts on that, we saw a really good reduction in false positives, even on our own device. What we ultimately did, and I'll try to show you my body here, we have a device that has 3 electrodes. It kind of goes on kind of both shoulders and down on your rib cage here. And so you get some pretty good separation there. It's a 3 electrode. So you would get 3 little squiggly lines. And then the device itself has what's called 2 channel. And so that means you can, like a loaf of bread, you cut it in half, and then you can also cut it long ways. So you get kind of 2 planes. So 3 electrodes, 3 squiggly lines looking at 2 channels. What we did, though, what we discovered is there's a way to mathematically represent 3 additional channels or vectors of those electrodes. So we've been able to create a 6 leader, 6 squiggly lines. And in one of those vectors is a noise cancellation vector. So it's just like headphones, like, kind of like you have on your head when we're on the airplane, noise cancellation. So what we were able to find was, if we got noise in 6 of in the 6 squiggly lines, usually one of those lines would get the cancellation vector, and it would be just a very perfectly clean signal. So where we found an 85% reduction in false positive from what we had done previously. So significant improvement. And we've got thousands of cases now where physicians would see a squiggly line and it looks like a lethal arrhythmia, and just 2 lines down, it's just normal heartbeat. So huge benefit that was first brought. That's our first real, kind of move the needle in terms of using AI. And so we've gone on to do that with a lot of the other rhythms, because you've got arrhythmias on the top of the heart and you've got arrhythmias on the bottom of the heart. So atrial and ventricular, and we've been able to kind of go rhythm by rhythm, applying that same methodology.
I mean, that's really interesting, because you think about just using machine learning to look at basically like time series information as like the basics, right, but the degree that you've taken it to kind of enhance that information, reduce the noise, get to something that you can get. I mean, you had a great point of, you do this in a hospital, controlled environments, whatever that happens to be. Like, you have no idea what people are doing at home, throughout every hour. Work, home, play.
Yes.
I mean, who knows what's going on, and how do you cut
every
through
conceivable scenario? Yeah, you can't imagine it. You're right.
Now, when you think about the solution and it evolving over time, how has technology changed that? Is it easier? Is it harder? I would imagine that one, you've got a ton of experience doing this now, because you started looking at this problem a long time ago. But is technology changing in a way that, when you think about the build out of these features and where your solution is going, that it's making it easier for you to bring new features, new capabilities, maybe enhance just the way it works?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's huge improvements in the technology, but I think probably more importantly is kind of on 2 fronts. From a regulatory perspective, there's a much greater awareness and openness for adoption, right? So in the world of the FDA, which we have to adhere to, you can't just use AI dynamically. You have to train an algorithm, prove that it works, make sure it's safe, submit it to the FDA, get it approved, and then it's static. You don't do anything on the fly. Like, we're not doing dynamic AI on the fly. You can have approved algorithms. And so we'll actually take the signal off the body. We'll kind of take it into a black box, if you will. We assess that and say, oh, it's an atrial algorithm and a ventricular algorithm that we're going to deploy when we do this assessment. So we're able to dynamically pick pre-approved or kind of static approved algorithms. So that's a huge advancement from a regulatory perspective. And the FDA has gotten very sophisticated now with the use of AI, because of the widespread adoption of AI and the push into healthcare. So that's been a really good thing. When we look at AI now, we kind of really look at it in two buckets. We look at it really more on the workflow side. So how can we make clinicians more efficient in how they do things, right? So in a growing world of clinician shortages, tech shortages, nurse shortages, but a growing population of people, continuing to get sick and heart disease continuing to grow, and people are living longer, so the heart disease continues to get exacerbated. So we want to make it more efficient to them. And then the other one is on the clinical side, and that comes from has nothing to do with efficiency, but everything to do with trying to find latent disease or disease that's hidden, that's not exposed yet. So what we're doing with new technologies, we're able to look forward in time and say what might be a problem, what's the risk stratification for that, and should we take an intervention or some kind of treatment now. So happy to go into each one of those, but those are kind of the two areas that we look at it. But the help or the boost is really augmented from a regulatory perspective. And I say the last piece is clinician adoption. I was in the endocrinology field doing insulin dosing calculations using, we couldn't even call it AI. We just called it mathematics. And it was a tough audience to convince that, to let a computer dose, one of the most dangerous drugs in the world from an overdosing perspective. And they just weren't quite ready to give it up to a computer. Whereas in cardiology, you go back to Dr. Holter in the 1960s running an algorithm on a device you put on your backpack. Cardiology is well tuned to algorithms and using computers and letting it make its diagnosis and chart by exception looking through. So it's a different audience. So from an acceptability, so an adoption perspective, getting clinicians to adopt it, it's been ripe. And so we've seen that, and radiology I think was a big front runner, but cardiology's been doing it for a long time and a much wider acceptance. So you put all that in a jumble and kind of stir it together. It's really just now the most ripe time I think in healthcare for AI.
Yeah. Well, when you think about compliance and privacy, how does security play a role in building a solution, and maybe how your solution is changing over time? When you think about your platforms that you have at your disposal today, how are you thinking about meeting those requirements, but without slowing down the innovation that you're looking for?
Yeah,
have your platform decisions helped with that?
Yeah, it's critical. Obviously, I don't know if you're aware of, not too long ago, big cybersecurity event in healthcare shut down most of healthcare. Hospitals had turned patients away. It was a huge deal. So I think it's even more amplified now than it was even before, even though it was a big deal. I've been in healthcare for a long time, almost 30 years, and when we do contracting with hospitals, it's a pretty big effort. But now the IT and security agreements are much more complex and more difficult than just trying to get your contract with a facility. So it's very, very important how we've dealt with it and been a startup in a smaller company for a while. It's difficult to hire all the people that can do that and get it done for you in a scalable way. So we've outsourced with great partners. Amazon Web, the AWS they're fantastic. They've got all the resources for security and things of that nature. And then specific to healthcare, we have other service providers that specialize in very certain things that allow us to scale and get us all the security requirements that we need so that we can ensure we've got the right envelope to move data and it's protected, encrypted, and if anybody gets it, they don't get all of it. There's no way to decipher the information. So we've been mindful of that, but the technology that just continues to evolve exponentially. And we just have to be really good about silly things like don't give out your password type of stuff to at the human level.
Yeah. It's interesting. We in the pen testing community, I mean, it's pretty common that people say they don't break in, they log in, because logins are the easiest way to get into everything. It's still majority of incidents are kind of led that way. Now, I heard that one of your clients is the Mayo Clinic. I would love to hear about your relationship with them.
Sure. So Mayo Clinic, a great partner. We have a really unique collaboration. We initially got an RFP from them, or request for purchase. I think they had what they called an RFA, request for acquisition, where they looked at about 14 vendors in the industry. They narrowed it down to 4 vendors, 3 of the longstanding companies in the industry, and then us. We were just a complete long shot. And so at the end of the day, their number one criteria for choosing us was culture fit and the technology. And the way they like to do partnerships is they want to be able to collaborate. And I think that's the best description of our relationship. So we have deployed our solution enterprise-wide, replaced all existing technologies across all the facilities nationwide. And further, they've set up an actual business inside of the Mayo Clinic, outside of the actual clinic itself, under a separate entity called the Mayo Collaborative Services. And so they went to market as a provider to provide cardiac monitoring services in the United States for non-Mayo facilities. And Mayo has relationships with about 4,000 non-Mayo facilities to do clinical laboratories, like clinical blood work. They're the third largest lab behind Quest and LabCorp in the US, I didn't know that. It was pretty surprising. So we have a great relationship with them. We've collaborated where they're in market with our product. They act really kind of like a distributor for us. At the same time, they came on as an investor into the company in 2023.
Oh, congratulations.
And we've got a couple people who sit on the board with Mayo Clinic, and we established what we call a know-how agreement with them. And what that does is it gives us unique access to all the brilliant minds, both at the clinical and the research and development, which what that ended up doing was leading to our research agreement with a joint venture that Mayo has established with a company called Anumana, which is a company that's more of a think tank AI house for the Mayo Clinic. And what they've done is they're on the clinical side. So they're developing advanced clinical AI to detect latent diseases. And I'll give you there's many examples. I'll give you the first one, is to be able to detect ejection fraction with an ECG. And what an ejection fraction is just how much blood your heart pumps out at any given heartbeat. It's a fraction. Okay. What is that number? And that number it's a watermark. If it's above this watermark, it's normal. If it's below, it's abnormal. So that would be an indicator to say you've got a problem with your heart, and it's not electrical, it's plumbing, which ECG is really an electrical measurement. So these are first of kind kind of plumbing things that you'd normally have to go and get an ultrasound, not knowing whether you've had that problem or not. And so now we can give an indication to say that you may or may not have a problem there. Let's go get an ultrasound or some other test. And what it's doing is it's detecting potentially symptom. You may not have a symptom, but it's detecting things that could be potentially hidden in the electrical side of your heart that isn't normally picked up in everyday tests. So pretty interesting stuff. There's a lot more around hypertension, what we call hyperkalemia. We can test to see if your potassium or your chemistry is artificially high or abnormally high without doing a blood test. We do that through your ECG. So really, really interesting stuff. It's really exciting to be able to have that on the clinical side at the same time have the workflow side where we're making the capability of PPPM to read and interpret vast volumes of data much, much quicker. All in combination, we're excited, I think, to be at the forefront of that with one of the, if not the number one, one of the leading healthcare systems in the world.
Oh yeah, it's really exciting. Actually, we had the COO of Mayo Clinic at our AI and healthcare event that we did at our Evolve conference in Vegas, and it was really interesting hearing how Mayo's stance of building this data that's been cleansed for privacy, for medical information, how they're building that platform, how they're pulling in other healthcare systems from around the globe to go be federated and share in this, same data, and then to allow whether it's startups or other companies to gain access to that data for novel AI use cases so that we can continue ushering forward this. Because, the access to, who has the data? Is it all in the same format? I mean, obviously you're doing something with your device, so you've got pretty strict controls over what data you're looking at, and maybe it makes it easier for you to develop. But where do you think, with what you're seeing from your relationship there and efforts like that, where we're federating data across multiple systems and then giving the ability for startups like yourself to dig into more sources of information and determine the kinds of solutions that you could develop, where are you seeing healthcare going over the next, let's say, 24 to 36 months? And are there certain things that you're really excited about that you're attacking now or that you think are in your roadmap?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think, this federated approach to, de-identified or anonymized data so that everybody can benefit it's a hallmark of Mayo, right? They are notoriously collaborative organization where they'll share everything, right? They hold nothing close to the vest. They want there's a great documentary on the public channel broadcasting system about that. I think Tom Hanks even narrated some of it. But it goes back to really the philosophy of what Mayo does, and it's about the health of humankind. And so, very driven organization, and they put the patient first always. They don't get on an airplane or go out for dinner and say, unless the patient, their mindset is, would the patient approve of me doing this, right? So, very, very unique mindset. So, we're actually contributing to that platform in terms of its data. That we're in a fortunate position with the know-how agreement that we get access to a unique amount of information as well. And so, one of the benefits of that is it's not just, so for any company, let's say you're in pulmonology or you're in neurology or something like that, and you're a startup and you need data to help train your algorithms. There's this idea of the convergence of correlating conditions. And so, example for the left ejection or left ventral ejection fraction, coming out of their AI ECG lab, they coordinate echocardiography with the ECG. So when we want to train and resubmit our algorithm back to the FDA, we need all these echocardiograms, right? So it was quite easy for us to be able to look back and say there's tens of thousands of these. They've got tens of thousands of studies that we've sent to them, and so we were able to put those together fairly quickly and somewhat conveniently, and be able to correlate those together so that we could get a very fast time to market in terms of getting the algorithms trained. They've got these things trained already internally, but they need to retrain it on our data. Move it from, like I say, a 12 lead ECG to a 6 lead ECG or another leaded type of device. And then there's a pipeline that goes down further from that, all sorts of different stuff. So we're unique, I think, in that we've got this relationship that gives us, I think, access that will help our time to market. And that's a benefit, because I think that'll help drive the market towards everybody moving in this direction, and a rising tide floats all boats. It's best for the patient at the end of the day. And it's just great that Mayo's that way, right? They're not trying to compete in the market and use it as a competitive edge, but they want to share, and that's one of the great things about working with them.
Yeah. You mentioned multiple times having to, you train, then you have to go submit your models. And then I guess I would love to hear more around, what does that management over time look like? We were talking to a company who specializes more on like the radiology side, and they were looking at, the efficacy of their models over time, like degrading over time, being able to monitor that continuously. And then what do you do about it, and who's intervening, and how do you think about model management over a long period of time as data changes or data sources change, or just the accuracy of your data changes? Have you had to deal with that same kind of problem? And is it getting bigger as there's more things that you're looking for and more models that are being integrated into your solution? How do you guys just think about model management overall?
Yeah. So I think there's definitely some, if you kind of go at it outside in, right? So if you look at the language models in terms of training, right? If you train language models on AI generated data, it takes about 9 trainings for the model to implode. So that's very real. Whereas in healthcare, we're never training data on AI trained data. We're always going to train it on native clinical data. So we're not too concerned about the models imploding or degradation. What you're going to see is probably changes in, moving from TensorFlow to, Google TensorFlow to other types of new technologies in terms of the models themselves. And what you're going to use is kind of the core elements relative to the programming language, call it, and how you do the training. And I think probably what will happen is we'll need fewer and fewer data sets as we go forward, and we'll probably need less reliance on human annotations of the data. And so one of the benefit, for a company like us, if we were to go back and take data and de-identify it, and then go back and anonymize it and annotate that data, because you can't just give an AI model dumb data. It has to be annotated so it knows what it is, right? So it's kind of garbage in, garbage out, just like a computer. And so I think in time, we'll see that the models that we generate and the AI that's able to do the training will start to become more intelligent. So we can train those models to know the difference between certain things it builds new intelligence, and it's not relying on old training data sets to get that knowledge, and it will then be able to help us probably annotate less, so that we can train models. I think we're still a ways from that for some period of time, but I think it'll make training much easier, less time intensive, and much simpler. But again, we have to go through the FDA on all this, so it's a very rigorous screening process for us to be able to do that. And so end of the day, it comes down to what's your sensitivity and specificity and accuracy and diagnostic yield and all those good things that we're held accountable to. And as long as we can maintain those standards, I don't think we'll ever really run into an issue.
How fast does that process move? When you've got an idea and then you want to go put it into production somewhere, going through that whole FDA process, could you just peel back the covers a little bit? And,
sure.
What does that
I think
entail?
if it depends on how good you are at understanding what the FDA wants. The FDA has actually recently updated all of its guidance, and they've moved to an electronic system for submission. So it used to be you could submit to the FDA while you're still testing your product, and they'd come back and ask you more questions. You give them the testing, things like that, and that could drag on for up to 12 months, type of thing. It's much more rigorous. In today's world, you don't submit anything until you're done with everything. And typically a company like us, we rely on consultants that are specialists in these environments that have taken, like, say, other technologies similar to ours and gone through that process. For example, with the Mayo Clinic AI, this will be one of our first advanced clinical kind of looking into the future AI algorithms that we'll deploy, which is on a 12 lead ECG, has already been approved by the FDA. So we're going to train it on our 6th lead and then resubmit it. So we'll anticipate it'll already be approved on that algorithm will be on a device that's already gone through a recent approval through that kind of more rigorous process. And so we'll have all the testing and elements as what we call a predicate device, something that's been done and tested before and approved by the FDA. And as we submit, and we'll submit through the Anamana channel, which has a pipeline and a large success rate with the FDA and a fairly streamlined process already for AI algorithm approval. And so we'll go through that component. That'll don't anticipate it. I would say it's anywhere between 6 and 9 months on an efficient process. Depending on how novel or breakthrough, whatever the designation is, sometimes it can be faster.
So, regulatory changes is a big topic right now. Thinking about, Colorado was the first state for the governor to sign a bill. California is, hot. Multiple states are trying to figure out what's going on. The EU, changes that happened last year, the executive order that happened last year. Do you feel like all these on the enterprise side are really just bringing about the same things that you're already having to do on the FDA perspective? Is this going to impact you at all? Or is what you're already going through more indicative of what everyone will have to do on the enterprise side that you're already subject to?
I think it'll tangentially have an impact. I think positive, though. I think there's probably a lot of things that kind of the enterprise side can draw from healthcare in terms of safety. One of I think where the healthcare is starting to go is how do you build trust with AI, right? And that's one of the big problems, right? Because everything you can get now on the enterprise side or the consumer side is labeled with "don't rely on this information; it can make mistakes," right? And in healthcare, you can't say that, right? Hey, my ECG makes mistakes. That just doesn't fit, right? So I think the next trend we'll see is we get into what's called explainable AI, using just common language to build trust. And so it's a way for the algorithm to give the end user or whoever's interpreting that, responsible for that information at the end of the day, a confidence score, call it, to say that I've looked at this and the tissue that wherever I'm looking at this is calcified, and it's more difficult for me to make this finding, so I get a score of 60 versus I'm looking at a clean heart and everything's flowing nicely, and I can tell you, 100% that's AFib. And so there's a way, I think that's probably where we're going to see a lot of this coming next. But I think, and I see it just in analytics, right? It's, I can search to find out if in our CRM, it'll tell me if, this contact is a great fit because it has a match score of this, right? So it's very similar. So it improves the confidence of the user towards that. And I think that'll be really ripe for healthcare. But I think that's ultimately where all this regulation is going now, or at least trying to, in terms of safety and security with AI. I think it's definitely warranted because I think unchecked, it could cause a lot of harm.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know that depending on what side of the fence, people fall on, it's a bad thing, it's a good thing. I think somewhere in the middle we'll find this healthy path. And I do think that healthcare is leading the charge in demonstrating how trustworthy AI in a variety of different ways can be done effectively, can be done in a way that doesn't bring us, years and years and years of approvals and what people are afraid of. And quite frankly,
Right.
in what you're talking about in clinical sessions, settings, you do have to explain how you derived, the answers that you came
Yes.
to. And that could be a big problem in AI in general, especially on the LLM side from like a generative like chat agents in
Sure.
healthcare. How do you control things like, well, if I give it the same question 5 times, the answer shouldn't be 5 different things. It should be the
Exactly.
same.
Yeah.
And how do we
Yeah.
improve all that so that
Yeah.
we can have much more confidence in what's going on versus trying to
Yeah.
guess at what the answer might be? So I just think it's a really great example of how you guys are leading the charge from the industry that you're in, the vertical that you focus on, and these admirable problems that you guys are trying to solve.
It's a lot of fun. It's great. It definitely it keeps you on your toes. Just from a having to make sure that you're doing always the right thing and causing no harm. That's a big thing. And but it's and it can be mind-numbingly frustrating at sometimes because you can't get it to do what you want it to do. But ultimately we prevail, and that's where having access to some of the greatest minds on the planet really helps.
So earlier you mentioned, and I just want to touch on this and give you time to kind of be provocative, maybe about the future, because a lot of what you're doing today, you could say, are kind of like the foundational AI components that will one day make up something that is much greater, because
Mhm.
all these smaller pieces that you are able to diagnose, when you combine them all together, you mentioned correlation earlier as kind of other steps of being able to now combine, multiple capabilities that you have into something else. As you keep extrapolating on that, um, what are you most excited about in the future with the direction of the things that you're doing, other organizations you're working with, and what do you think this whole thing looks like 5 years from now?
Yeah, I think the what it's kind of multi. I'm like a quantified individual. I measure everything. I got I've been doing. I've had a Fitbit on since I don't know 2008, whenever they first came out. Right when they were a little thing you could just slip in your pocket. So I've been, and so I think the idea of and it's been beneficial to me over time, just being able to understand how my body reacts to stress or to whatever. I actually have an arrhythmia, and I've been able to, deal with it mostly for the last 5 years, just through diet, health, and lifestyle choices. Right. So, but ultimately, I'm going to have an electrical intervention. But technology and data has helped me manage it more effectively, which has kept me out of the hospital, and it's made a better quality of life. So, I like that as an idea that where we're headed, I think in 5 years, we're thinking about how do we make monitoring, because you're always going to need an acquisition device, whether you're swallowing a nanobot or you've got a lens in your eye, or you're just wearing a patch on your chest, or you've got something on your watch. And I think the healthcare delivery system is reacting. I can tell you that Mayo Clinic has an initiative of the hospital 75 years in the future. They're building a facility in Rochester, the hospital of the future, and it's a really big endeavor. And I've talked to some of the folks on that team, and I'll say, well, what do you guys talk about? Have you thought about this? And they're like, no, that's not far enough in the future, right? It's so if you think about 75 years, it's really difficult to come up with what that might actually be. So people are actually thinking about that. But I think in the next 5 years, somebody asked me this question on a podcast about 6 or 7 years ago, and I said, well, it wouldn't surprise me if Amazon popped up a hospital. And so fast forward to where we are today, they didn't open a hospital, but they got into healthcare, right, in a
Right.
pretty big way. So they bought One Medical. They've got lots of clinics. They have a whole telehealth initiative with their employees. They wanted to expand more broadly. So, but I think though that the hospital of the future is completely decentralized. You'll have a place to go to get your procedures. It'll be like one giant outpatient clinic, and it's really only meant for the severely ill. It'll be like one big ICU. And so hospitals themselves today have kind of 4 care areas, if you will, if you call the emergency department a care area. But typically, if you go into a hospital, you're having a procedure, and you'll either stay temporarily and you'll leave, or you'll go in through the emergency room and go home, or you'll go in and you'll go into an ICU, which is, the highest level of acuity. When you're done with that, you'll get discharged into a step-down unit or progressive care, which is not quite the regular medical surgical bed, but it's not the ICU either. It's kind of an in-betweener. And then there's the rest of the beds. When you're done with that, you go down to the medical surgical. And the U.S. health system has about 1 million beds, and about 30% of those, or 300,000, are in the ICU. About 100,000 are in that transitional care area, and then the rest are the other beds where you don't have connectivity, you don't have monitors hanging on the wall, and then there's some other beds, post ops and things like that. What I see in 5 years is a highly continuous or contiguous type of monitoring capability that would either catch that patient in the ED. Right now, you typically have very limited monitoring, where you could put somebody on say, telemetry that's mobile. And you could say, well, I don't have an ICU bed, but we need to put you on, but we need to wait. So rather than have you just sit here and not get any monitoring, we're just going to put a device on you. And we can go ahead and start your treatment or your monitoring while you're waiting. So we can expedite care. And if there's an event, because there's events that happen every day, somebody's in the emergency room waiting and something bad happens while they're just sitting there waiting. So the idea where we can effectively virtually admit that patient faster, or they don't need to be admitted, but they need to be monitored, and we can send them home on another telemetry device of some kind. And those telemetry devices won't just do ECG. They'll do your blood pressure, or they'll do your blood oxygen. They'll do all sorts of multi different kind of parameters. But they'll be able to communicate effectively as if you would have gone into the hospital. And so that's where this, you mentioned at the top of the call, is that the idea of care in the home, right? And so it's proven, multiple studies, patients recover better and they heal faster and they get better quicker in the home, because it's in their environment. When I was in the insulin dosing space, it was like, if you want to lose control of your blood pressure sugars, go to the hospital. It was the worst place for a patient to go. And so we knew that getting them out of the hospital sooner, and they could normalize and treat themselves better at home. So the idea of getting people back to their home is better care, but it's also a lot less costly on the health system. So if there's a way for us to either prevent the admission or shorten the admission, meaning they have to go in, but we can get them home sooner, or you go in for that procedure instead of staying in the hospital or having to go into a progressive or a step down unit, because that's where they do telemetry monitoring. I can monitor every bed now, or I can say, just go home and we can monitor you there, right? So I think, as we're able to decentralize that and create the fifth care area, and the fifth care area is your house, call it the EICU, right? Kind of the virtual ICU. We'll be able to decentralize, and that's going to create healthcare systems to create different kinds of models. And I think the other big piece is on the payer side, the reimbursement, right? Because there's technology, there's clinical, the providers, and then there's the payer side. Who's going to pay for it all? How's it all get paid for? If we can remove all the lines in the sands from how it's done today, that's a fee for service, you do this test, you get reimbursed. If we can just say, look, we're going to monitor these patients for this condition. I don't want to be penalized if I can fix the problem and get it done in 2 days, and I'll take it on the chin if I elect to go out to 30 or 60 or 90 days. I'll take that on, but we'll agree to a price that we can set that's got everybody's interest in line, including the patients from a payment perspective. That, I think, those three, when those all are kind of working harmoniously, the technology enables the payers to be able to do that, and then the providers can get aligned on the economics and in the clinical care. We can improve care. Everybody wins, and I think that's where you see this Amazon model, buying clinics, and then the partnership with healthcare providers to be able to kind of coalesce that. I think the hospital systems creating that environment versus, say, Amazon doing it will probably be the thing that works, because you've got trusted names like Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, Permanent, those things. So anyway, a little bit of a long story, but I think I don't think it's not an easy thing, right? Healthcare can move methodically slow, but in 5 years, I think we'll start to see the beginning models of that. And that's where value-based care has tried to come in, and ACOs have always been trying to do this, but I think the technology is just now there. And Medicare, for example, has always thought that there was never a technology that would enable the reimbursement of continuous monitoring in the home, and now it exists.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. I mean, you think about all those things together, and we can possibly reduce the price of care, put people back in a situation where they can get back in their homes. I mean, nobody really wants to stay in the hospital longer than they need to. And then the pressure on the families around them, Families
Right.
don't want to have to spend all that time in the hospital either. And if you could do that in a way that creates this fifth bed, or the virtual, care angle that you were talking about, I think everybody wins. And it's a spectacular story. I can't wait to see how the next few years pan out, and especially, your role in it. Stuart, any last things that I didn't cover that you really want to share with our audience?
I don't think so. I mean, I think maybe it's just to cap it that it's exciting to be where we are. Where the collaboration with Mayo has taught us this concept of, it's almost like a open source, right? We're a company that likes this concept of open source, because if the more people we can help, the more everything will grow and become better. And we'll get to that 5-year mark. If we could get there in 4 years, it would be huge. So, I think, if the only thing I would say is any other company that's out there is that's a great philosophy, because if the patient wins, we all win. And it's such a huge industry, but it's also such a small community, healthcare. And so, the more we can all kind of coalesce together, I think the better. So I appreciate the time today to be able to tell the story.
Yeah, I love it. I love your story, Stuart. Thank you so much for spending time with us. And I loved hearing about what you guys are doing, where this whole thing is, where everything is going. And I'll definitely be following your company to see how the next few years pan out. And maybe 5 years from now, we'll go share, a coffee or something somewhere, and we'll go see how your prediction pans out.
Let's see how it does. Yeah, exactly. I would love that. So,
all right, Stuart.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Have a good one.
You've been listening to LiveAI. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation. This episode is sponsored by Trace3. To learn more about why you should connect with them, about your enterprise practical AI use case, visit them at trace3.com or look for them on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening.